Welcome to the C Analysis podcast. I'm your host, Chaz Nuttycombe, the director of C Analysis. Today, I am joined by the legendary Dave Wasserman of the Cook Political Report, at Redistrict on Twitter. The census data just came out, and I thought, if I wanted to talk a little bit about the new census data that has come out and redistricting, who better to bring on than the man who was able to snatch up the redistrict ad on Twitter himself. Dave, thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, thanks, Chaz. And, no one covers state legislative elections on Twitter like you do. So congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been very patient waiting for this census data. I know you're really focused on the congressional redistricting, and I'm just very excited to crank out the state legislative forecast, and getting to look at, especially what some of these independent commissions are going to be doing at the state legislative level. But yeah, well, let's get right into it. I want to start with New York, because New York was the most interesting to me. Obviously, New York just barely lost one of its congressional districts. We found that out earlier in the year. But what was surprising to me was the growth in New York City that they had and the loss in upstate. So is when they redraw the lines, and Democrats are, I would say, probably going to gerrymander, but is the district that they're going to lose going to be in upstate New York? And do you think, I guess as well, that they'll combine like Tenney with Stefanik?
Well, look, New York is almost existential to Democrats' prospects for holding the majority. It is not only potentially the biggest weapon in Democrats' arsenal this time, it's potentially the biggest weapon in the history of modern gerrymandering for either party. I believe Democrats could eliminate up to 5 of the 8 sitting Republican districts. And 2 Republicans are leaving their seats, which helps a little bit. But the census was good news for Democrats across the country. It was especially good news for Democrats in Illinois and New York, which are the two big states that they really get to gerrymander. The fact that Chicago and New York New York City, that is, clocked in with stronger than expected populations will mean that more districts can be allocated to those cities. And that makes it easier for Democrats to pack Republicans into rural districts in both those states.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I think across the board, when we're looking at, just nationally, the population changes, but especially again in New York and Illinois. But altogether, I think it bodes very well for Democrats, at least in the future. But it's interesting because 2021 just has been a pretty good year for Democrats when it comes to redistricting news. For example, before the census projections came out, Arizona was supposed to get a district, and that probably would have been a Republican leading district. Rhode Island was supposed to lose a district. Minnesota was supposed to lose a district. Texas was supposed to gain one more district, if I recall correctly, in Florida as well. And obviously Republicans control redistricting in both those states. And now with the census data, I think it does bode well for Democrats. So I think they are currently looking at, when it comes to redistricting, they're in a better position than where people saw them at the beginning of the year. Would you say that's fair?
Maybe marginally. I always have thought that the conventional wisdom about Republicans having this enormous advantage in redistricting this cycle is a bit off. First of all, I think a lot of the conversation about redistricting and gerrymandering has been dominated by the progressive left. It's exploded in public consciousness as a topic in the last 10 years, in part because Democrats have looked at the map maps that Republicans passed last time and believe that it's terribly unfair. And so a lot of what you'll read, by Ari Berman and Mother Jones, for example, whenever he, talks about the sky falling and Democrats are going to lose between 11 and 16 seats, supposedly in 4 southern states. Well, look, that's not pricing in the advantage that Democrats may have in not only New York and Illinois, but some commission states as well. Democrats are pretty optimistic about the makeup of the new Michigan commission, for example. They are marginally optimistic about California. The fact of the matter in California is that, yes, the state's losing a seat. Yes, that's likely to come from LA County, but it could also draw a lot of Republicans outside of LA inwards in a way that jeopardizes at least one of those Republican swing seats. So, you could end up with Democrats performing a bit better in redistricting than initial expectations if certain things go their way. But the emerging theme that I don't think a lot of people are talking about right now, but the emerging theme for me is the crucial nature of state Supreme Courts this go around. It's clearer than ever before that the Supreme Court, is not going to adjudicate partisan gerrymandering cases. It's come out and said that in Rucho, right? It's pretty clear that Congress is not going to be passing sweeping legislation that sets limits on partisan gerrymandering either. So state Supreme Courts, I think, could feel more of an onus to step in when parties decide to get really aggressive.
Yeah. I think one of the things, I know you're earlier tweeting about North Carolina, but given the new makeup of the North Carolina Supreme Court after the 2020 election compared to where it was before, they struck down 2 previous maps in the 2010s that North Carolina had. I think that they're going to let the Republicans gerrymander, not to the kind of maps that we would see with for example, the Charlotte to Winston-Salem, I believe, district. Not something like that, but I think the current state Supreme Court in North Carolina would allow them to pass a map that, even the one that was struck down before, the one that was used in 2018. But you're right, state Supreme Courts have a big role to play. For example, in Texas, they are, and Iowa, they are getting really close with this when it comes to how much time they have left to draw these lines. And so it may be up to, if they do not get these lines into Texas, basically summarizing this is that it's going to be up to the Texas Supreme Court to have these lines drawn. And that would be the same in Iowa, but based on one of my guests before, Laura Bellin of Bleeding Heartland, she believes that they're going to be able to get those lines in before September 1st. A good amount of these states have that deadline, September 1st. But yeah, well, when it comes to, I guess, the rural parts of these districts in states like Texas and Georgia, given the population loss in a lot of those areas, especially Texas, when I was looking at the county map, just how aggressive do you think they can get in states like Texas and Georgia? Because there's talk of maybe a new Austin district being a Democratic pack coming in, and another one in Atlanta. But I mean, theoretically, can't they get more aggressive than that without dummy mandering? Or do you think they have to get those packs?
Chaz, first of all, I think it would be political malpractice on the part of Texas Republicans not to draw a Democratic vote sink in Austin. Could you bacon mander Austin into 15 different districts? Right. Sure, I suppose you could, but one of them would probably be bound to be competitive by the end of the decade, and it would far surpass any past ugliness of maps. And look, I think legislators can be convinced to go pretty far with regard to gerrymandering, but not to the extremes it would take to crack Austin in enough directions to make it worthwhile for Republicans. And by the way, Republican incumbents in Texas increasingly don't want parts of Austin. So look, I just think given the explosion in population along I-35, it makes total sense to draw an 80% Democratic district in Austin, which would make the surrounding districts 10 points redder than they are now. And keep in mind, Republicans hold 23 of the 36 seats in Texas. 9 of those 23 seats, Joe Biden won more than 47% of the vote in 2020. So Republicans it's like the electoral version of climate change. They're seeing all these brewing storms that are pretty unnatural for what we think of as red Texas, and they've got to do some mitigation measures now.
Yeah. And what about Atlanta? Is that kind of like the same scenario where they're going to have to put a pack to make sure they don't get a dummy mander?
Well, look, I think Georgia is a closer call than Texas, and the reason is, Republicans could conceivably attempt a 10-4 map if they draw Sanford Bishop's district north into the southern Atlanta suburbs. So, it's possible to preserve 4 Black majority districts in Georgia by drawing Macon and Columbus in with Clayton County south of Atlanta. If Republicans do that, then they can draw 3 other Atlanta area districts that are all Black majority and then claim the other 10 districts for themselves. I'm not sure that Republicans want to risk a federal court review of that kind of map. That would pretty radically alter what has historically been a pretty compact rural Black majority district, Sanford Bishop's district. Clearly, his district is going to have to expand to hit its ideal population. There are ways for it to do that while retaining an African-American majority. But, the question then becomes, okay, what are Republicans going to do with the northern Atlanta portion of the map? I think the pretty clear play for the next decade is to draw a Democratic vote sink pairing Lucy McBath and Carolyn Bordeaux. If Republicans do that, then all the other districts in northern Georgia would be Trump plus 25 or more. They could get there. And that would be a pretty long way to go before those districts become competitive with suburban change. If Republicans just were playing for the short term, they could probably limit Democrats to 3 seats in Atlanta and make the rest of the seats Trump plus 15 rather than 25. That's a map, I think, that could backfire in a matter of 4 to 6 years. And so I think the play for Republicans here is more likely than not a 9-5 map.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you. I think that's their safest bet. Well, what are some other interesting takeaways from the census data that you've seen so far?
Yeah, so I'm looking at the. I was looking first and foremost to see what the Hispanic share of the population would be, and at 18.7% of the country, that is a bit higher than some estimates. Or that some minority groups and Democrats had feared heading into this. And that should protect some of the power that is in urban areas of, let's say, LA or urban Texas from going to whiter, more Republican districts. There wasn't this massive Latino undercount. I also found it interesting that the share of residents who responded that they were of multiple race ticked up. I think obviously part of that is due to changes in questionnaire design of the census. That could actually make it more difficult to draw majority minority districts in the true sense of the word that are 50% plus of one race. Because when you have a more significant share of the minority population that lists multiple races, it's harder to get 50% of one in one district. And so I'm curious to see how courts interpret that. Do courts become more flexible and say, okay, well, we'll endorse a VRA standard that includes people who, aren't just only African American, but African American and of another race. That makes it kind of more complex to work with the data involved in drawing some of these lines. But it's a big deal for states like Michigan or Chicago, where traditionally urban districts have been kept above 50% African American. So, I think one aspect of redistricting that everyone needs to be paying more attention to is how courts are going to interpret the VRA differently this cycle from how they have in the past.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I didn't even think of that. Yeah, I know that the two or more races, a demographic, wasn't it like or Asian and two other races combined, wasn't it like 1 or 2 points higher than what the estimated was?
That's right. And, Asian population certainly increased a good bit, but a lot of that was an increase in multiple race or other. So that complicates matters, frankly, in a lot of states.
Yeah. Have you got to look at the changes in Virginia at all?
So, Virginia, I think for the most part was pretty in line with expectations. Obviously, Loudoun County and Fauquier and Prince William have been big drivers of population growth, and that means that once again, some districts will need to encroach further into Northern Virginia. With a commission, it's really hard to predict the result now. I think the most logical approach would be for the 10th district, Jennifer Wexton's district, to become a more Loudoun-centric district. Historically, it was drawn by Republicans to stretch out into the Shenandoah Valley. I think it could be Loudoun plus some of Fairfax and Prince William this time, and it could lose its portion of the Shenandoah Valley to the 6th district. So, big question is what happens with Rob Whitman's first district. Does that move a little bit northward into more of Prince William County? And then, we'll also be looking to see, what happens with the 2nd and 7th districts, which are the only two other really potentially competitive districts in the state. Republicans are very excited about Jen Kiggins running for Congress in Virginia Beach against Elaine Luria. But as it stands, that district, it's hard to make it that much more Republican. I could see ways it would get more Democratic. Democrats want to put more of Norfolk in the 2nd district. The 7th district, it seems like there would be a logical trade-off for Abigail Spanberger getting Charlottesville and Albemarle in exchange for losing some more rural counties like Powhatan, perhaps, or even the northern section of her district up in Culpeper. But there are a lot of different permutations, and I'm really eager to see which direction the commission decides to go, or if it can even agree.
Yeah, that's a fair point. They may not the commission may not be able to work together and get a map, and may go to the Supreme Court. Well, I think the three questions that are really interested, or the three districts that are really in question here, are the 1st, the 7th, and the 5th. The 5th may, as you pointed out, if Albemarle is no longer in the 5th, it's going to become a safe Republican district. And then, that goes into the 7th, and then Spanberger still has a competitive district, but it definitely skews Democratic. And then the 1st district, you're saying how it could go more into Prince William, but if they were to make the fifth, I guess more hugging the North Carolina border, hugging North Carolina border more, then Whitman would be getting, pretty much all of Fauquier. He'd be getting Rappahannock. He'd be getting Culpeper. He'd be getting Orange. He may even be able to get Spotsylvania. I think there is still a way. I mean, based on the population growth, that you can draw a district that has Hanover County, New Kent County, Louisa, Goochland, Powhatan, and parts of Henrico and Chesterfield. And if they were to split Richmond City, then you could still have a district that's bluer than the current seventh district. And obviously that's because you don't have spot seed. That's it. You don't have Culpeper. You don't have Orange in it. That goes into Whitman's. But that's not to say that Whitman's district couldn't get bluer in that scenario as well. I think the fifth district, regardless, is going to be Republican. It's just going to be whether it's a competitive Republican district or it's going to be a solid Republican district. So you were talking about, again, with Loudoun, the big population there, and or the explosion population there, and Stafford as well. In the Richmond area, where I originally hail from, I think what was interesting was the 20% growth in New Kent County and Prince George County. My pet theory is that white conservatives in the Richmond area are leaving the diversifying and increasingly liberal suburbs that they previously resided in places like Henrico and Chesterfield, and moved into those counties. Do you think there's any merit to that theory, or?
Well, actually, Chaz, it's funny. I wanted to show you my Virginia scenario map because of all podcasts, this is one where we could get into the weeds. Can I pull that up?
Sure.
Okay.
All right. So yeah, I think I've seen this map. I think I've seen you post it before. Yeah.
So you mentioned Hanover, of course, because I know you have I know it's your home base. So I've put some of I've put some of Hanover in the seventh, which I know it was purged famously from the seventh to the first a couple of years ago. But the portion of Hanover that's in the seventh is actually becoming more marginal because you have Ashland in this iteration in the seventh. And so overall, if you look at the partisan breakdown here, this version of the seventh with Charlottesville, with West End, Richmond suburbs would have been Clinton +3, and I'd venture to guess it was double digits for Biden.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. Ashland, and then it's I would say it's we call it Atlee suburbs. Yeah. Some people like to call it Mechanicsville, but it's not quite Mechanicsville. Mechanicsville's more in the very much eastern part of Hanover. Right. But yeah, I would say that when it comes to Hanover County, 301 really divides the county. It's two different worlds. But you're absolutely right. Western Hanover is bluer, albeit a little bit more rural. But yeah, it's got a higher black population, and it's got again, you got Atlee that is becoming more blue as well. But yeah, and then I see what you mean by the first becoming bluer, and then yeah, you've got a pretty solid fifth. I will say, as a RVA resident, seeing Chesterfield split into 3 counties is kind of something. But honestly, I barely go into Chesterfield anyway. Hey, you know what?
Well, hey, I think there is a case for Chesterfield being in multiple districts. I think Chesterfield kind of has some split personalities politically and is changing pretty rapidly.
Yeah. Well, let me show you mine. Let's see. Screen share. Or how do I?
And in fact, the way I have it here, you've got the very rural portions of southern Chesterfield in the 5th district. Culturally, they have a lot in common with Southside, We got some of the eastern portions of Chesterfield in the 4th district because they are an extension of a lot of the African American neighborhoods of Richmond increasingly. And then I've got Midlothian in the 7th with a lot of West End Henrico. So I think there's a case to be made there.
Yeah. Personally, I hope they split Richmond City. I think they're, when it comes to Richmond City, really just the west part of the city is just so different from the eastern part, and especially from north and south where you got the James River. But I can see some parts of the James River going into it. This is how my map is drawn, where you have, again, Louisa, Goochland, Powhatan, Hanover, New Kent, parts of Chesterfield and Henrico, and then you got some Richmond City, and then you got Amelia in the 7th. And this is a very narrow Northam district. In 2017, the current 7th voted for Gillespie. And then you got the 5th and the 1st still leaning Republican, but the 5th and the 1st on this map that I've drawn, and I will be posting this map. I'll post it when the podcast comes out, because this will come out next week.
Mm-hmm.
But
so this is interesting.
Yeah.
I'm looking at
the 5th and the 1st are actually Kane districts, whereas the current 5th and the 1st are currently Stewart districts. So yeah, Kane would win everything but obviously the 6th and 9th.
So Chaz, I'm looking at the western portion of your map, and this is interesting. So I think for many decades, the 9th district has been avoiding its Roanoke fate by extending into the Allegheny Highlands and Southside Virginia. Don't you think it's time for the 9th district to swallow Roanoke? It already has Salem.
Yeah. I mean, I think Bedford is just a much better fit for it. Like, the thing is, I see Roanoke as it has more in touch with the other cities in the valley. They're not big cities, Harrisonburg, Stanton, Waynesboro, and then Winchester up there, which obviously is currently in the 10th. But yeah, it still already does have Salem. But I think Covington and Allegheny, it was always weird looking at the current map, seeing that go into the 9th, because seeing Allegheny separated from Bath and Highland, those are 3 counties that are very similar to each other.
That's a strong community of interest.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, it's in Craig D's district for a region, for a reason.
Right. And they share their own radio station, for God's sakes. Have you, Chaz, have you ever been to the Highland Maple Festival?
I have not.
It's one of my favorite festivals in Virginia. I mean, you drive into Monterey, you got to get a lot of switchbacks in to get there, and you feel like you've been transported to Switzerland with a kind of a Western Virginia accent. But you've got to hit up all the maple farms there and go in March. I mean, that's the only way to do it.
I will, if it's in March, I'll absolutely go. Unfortunately, I really wanted to go to Floyd Fest, because obviously Floyd is, just a little bit away, 45-minute drive from Blacksburg. But I didn't know Floyd Fest was in July. I thought it was sometime in the fall. But yeah, I'll definitely make sure to check that out. Because Highland is probably, I would say, 1.5 or 2-hour drive. But yeah, I'll make sure to go to that, because that does sound fun. But yeah, so I just put Bedford in the 9th. That also ties Smith Mountain Lake together. Because currently, not currently, but just always pretty much Smith Mountain Lake has Franklin County and Bedford County. So that way you're connecting that community. It just has a little bit of Pittsylvania County in it as well. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with this map. Obviously, it's using the 2019 stuff, and I'll see what I have to move around when the 2020 stuff is updated. But yeah, I'm really happy with how this has come out. And I took a little bit of a different approach from you and Prince William. I just kind of got the exurban parts and kind of swingy suburb parts of Prince William, and made a more diverse 11th district. You can see, if I can pull up the demographic data here. You can see that the voting age population in the 11th is just barely over 15%. Total population is 44% white. So yeah, and then I had to split Loudoun just because I was trying to not divide Fairfax so many ways. You got to divide it between 3 ways, and Prince William's only split 2 ways. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with this map. I had to take this part of Southern Loudoun, which interestingly, though is rural, these are all Democratic leaning precincts. It's an interesting part of Loudoun County. But yeah, I'm not going to be drawing. I know you like to draw a lot of congressional maps. I'm not really interested in doing that, though I do plan on trying to draw state Senate maps for as many states as I can. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right when it comes to Virginia with, not really knowing what the commission is going to do. I want to say I think they're going to lean toward trying to keep the current type of map in place, maybe something along these lines, rather than going for pretty much an entirely new map where you've got Spamberger having Charlottesville and the 5th becoming a more southern district. But yeah. All right. Well, I think that's a good length we've got here. Dave Wasserman of the Cook Political Report, thank you so much for coming on. It's a pleasure. It's good to talk to you again. And I will definitely make sure to go to Highland in March. I've always wanted to go out there, especially to like Bath County and what's that place they have the I think it's in Hot Springs.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have like an event there, like a fundraiser or something, right?
Yeah. At the homestead.
Yep. So I've always wanted to get out there. But yeah, Dave, thank you so much for coming on.
All right. Thanks for having me and good luck.